Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a disassembly for you of this little guy. This is the Andre Thorburn Genesis. This is made by a company I have literally never heard of before. They actually, Andre Van Heerden reached out to me on Instagram and said, "Hey Nick, we're working on a new model. It's made in Oregon in the U.S. Are you interested in checking it out?" I said, "Sure, that's weird, but why not, right?" And so this is sort of a production version of what feels a lot like a Thorburn Von Heerden A5 or like A7. I don't know their numbers very well, but either way, that is absolutely a production version of that. And so I'm very curious to see what the inside of this guy looks like. Unfortunately, in order to get into it, I am going to need to use a T5 screw head, which is just not great. Yeah, T5. One thing to note before we go any further is that centering is very, very close to dead on, if maybe slightly favoring the show side. That's good. The action on it is absolutely, well, pretty damn good. No real complaints with the action there. Then finally, this is, as I believe we saw on the blade, IKBS. So what that might mean is that we are in for a world of many, many little balls rolling around inside the handle of this knife, and that's not going to be a beautiful thing, unless they are caged IKBS, which could be the case as well. Either way, we will see here shortly. I am, though, as a precaution, using a mat that has a... well, it has a whole bunch of rims all around the outside there, and that just makes this... oh, and that's T6. Okay. And that's free spinning T6. Okay. Come here, handle. T6. But anyways, I'm using this mat such that in case there are a billion loose bearings in there, I will be able to contain them as they come streaming out of the knife. All right, so we've popped that loose, and there is a bronze washer on the inside of the pivot screw, which likely maybe means that the pivot screw is a little too long. Holy crap, look at all these screws. So now what I've done is I've taken off the outer, looks to be G10 shell. That reveals these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more screws, all of which are T5. That are holding the back spaces together. Luckily, none of them are thread locked, but still, holy crap. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to array these on my mat, because I have little pockets here in the order they came off the knife, just in case they are of different lengths. I suspect that they will not be, but I want to make sure that I am not setting myself up for a world of pain when I have a lot of combinations of 5 screws. Yeah, these look to be all equivalent, and that would be a much better way to go about the world, but we will see. All right, all T5. Now at this point, I should be able to, I'll pull the blade out, and I should be able to lift, and then, hey, okay, caged bearings. All right, good. Whoa, big caged bearings. These are shouldered. You can see here these little back spaces have just the slightest little shoulder there, but they do want to come off. So, okay, this guy will go here. No, here. Those two are staying in position on that liner, and then I'll bring this guy over here. That way those are all in position. Okay. This is actually a lot better than I expected this to be going right now. These are big caged bearings. I don't think I've ever seen bearings this large in a pocket knife. That doesn't matter particularly. It's not the case that, you know, like, oh, wow, it's terrible, big bearings. No, I don't think it has much of an effect. But it did catch me off guard. But I was expecting thousands of little loose balls, whereas this is actually quite straightforward. And so that's good. And you can see here that both the blade and the liners are heavily pocketed to accommodate those big old bearings. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see if I can push the pivot out a little bit and pull it through. And there is a washer on the other side of the pivot as well. That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use my T6 here just to allow me to turn this, clean a little bit more effectively. Okay, now I'm going to use a Q-tip, just a standard U.S. Q-tip, probably international for that matter. And if you're ever curious, by the way, about any of the tools I'm using for my knife disassemblies, go to nickshabazz.com/tools, and you will see the full gamut in a video explaining each of them. So, Basically cleaning this up here. We see internal stop pin construction, relatively thin stop pin, but that shouldn't matter too much. Go ahead and there we go. Clean out this little region down in here. A couple of little burrs in there. But cleaning that out, cleaning this out. This is literally fresh from the factory. So this cleanup is largely unnecessary. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is completely freaking unnecessary. However, at the same time, in order to put it on even footing with everything else that I do, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways, as well as because disassembly can be an important part of understanding how a folding knife works. That's something to keep in mind. Okay, so yeah, this is a, yeah, interesting. I didn't expect any of this, but you know what? Now that it's here, I can work with this. Okay, and try and push this through. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use some 10-weight nano oil here for the bearings, for the pivot, etc. Just because it tends to be pretty good for this, has good longevity. Go ahead and put some oil in there. Exxon Shabazz here, going to town. All right, going to go ahead and drop on the first bearing. And just rotate, rotate, rotate to make sure that it's getting nicely distributed grease. Then I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil inside the detent ball hole here. That way that will distribute itself along the detent ball path, and we should be good to go there. Drop that into place. Okay, good. Next thing we're going to do is similar amounts of lubrication on the other side here. And again, rotate, rotate, rotate. Now, I need to place these into position. Having these very tiny little shoulders is better than unshouldered at all, but it is also not going to make them super secure in this portion of the disassembly. Oh, interesting. I just realized that this means that these screws are going directly into the liner on the other side here. And that's not necessarily something you want for long-term longevity. Generally, you want to have a pair of screws going into a barrel, which can be replaced. Mind you, this doesn't really... This is one of those things that I say regularly, but perhaps is less meaningful than I believe it to be, because that's not a very common failure mode, but if you over-torque things, you could, in theory, strip out, and I'm just moving the barrels so they're all on the bottom here. But anyways, that could, in theory, become an issue. Am I leaving anything out of this knife? No, I'm not. This is going way smoother than I expected it to. Like, it's quiet, too quiet, is kind of my feeling right now. But that's okay. What I'm going to do first here, actually, is I'm going to just start dropping in these screws. The reason for that is that until I, get them screwed in, that nothing much is going to happen, but at the very least, it keeps those spaces in their positions. And then I can go through and strategically tighten the rest of them here. And actually, I am not able to fully tighten down the pivot because the pivot goes on top of this G10, until I get everything buttoned up in here, so I need to just tighten these down. That is going to make it a little more difficult to adjust any centering issues, but hopefully those won't be affected, because generally you want to have all of the other scales accessible from the end. That's not a strong statement, but anyways, that can be a way that you can adjust centering, is by, if things are a little off, untorquing the pivot a little bit, and then, untorquing the back handle screws a little bit, and then retightening them with the pivot fully torqued. But anyways, we'll go ahead and see. Actually, I don't need to put those other two screws in yet, so let's go ahead and just put this on. So what we have here is some pretty thick thread locker. I'm going to go ahead and just try and clean that off of there. And then I'll use some thread lock of my own, some Loctite Blue 242 on a stick here. And then insert this into place. And I have both of those metal washers in position, although, there we go. It had come out, so I needed to... Okay, so that's that. At this point in time, the knife should actually be ready to run. These last two screws here on the handle don't help us much. It is quite nearly dead center, if not slightly favoring the show side, which is what we saw before. No blade play at all. That's good. I'm going to see if I can loosen the pivot just a little bit and perhaps get a nicer action. Yeah, might yet be able to. No play. Good action. Very good action. I mean, at some level, my initial impression here is that this feels a lot like a Thorburn or one of the AA5 models. Not like completely, the tent isn't quite there. I mean, at some level, it feels like a Thorburn in its design and execution. It's not quite a Thorburn in terms of the things that make a Thorburn. You're like, oh my God. If you ever at a knife show or something like that Andre or one of his folks are at, make sure and get over there. His work is, he might be one of the best knife makers whose work I don't own. That's maybe a weird thing to say. I mostly do production stuff. So there were a lot of amazing custom makers whose work I've never touched. But still, I mean, Thorburn, oh man, he does some great stuff. But okay, so the handle screws are all in place. Centering is right where we had it with the start. Yeah, that's pretty much good to go. Nice. That was way easier than I expected. 11 minutes and 28 seconds for an IKBS Thorburn disassembly. I feel like that might be a record of some variety. But mind you, it's a whole different thing. So do keep that in mind. But mostly, I hope this is interesting to you and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.